What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So before the end of 2021, we were expecting to hear more information around Final Fantasy XVI. Well, we're getting pretty close to the end of the year, and they did put an update out yesterday. Unfortunately, though, it's not the news people were hoping for, and we're going to go over that one here today. Also, we're going to be talking about a couple of big releases that appear set for next year that may have had their release dates leaked online a bit early, and we're also going to be going over an interesting poll in Japan where 50,000 people voted on their favorite console games ever, and the top 10 may surprise you guys. If you enjoy these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton, and if you're new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below and ring that notification bell so you can keep up to date with all the uploads here on the channel. And we're going to start today with Hideo Kojima and 2022. Every year, Famitsu will go around and have questionnaires set up for different publishers and developers in Japan as to what their plans are for 2022 and their aspirations. And, well, Kojima's were as cryptic as you'd expect. We can see this posted up, and it is translated from Japanese to English, but the biggest thing here is what to look out for in 2022. A year in which the entertainment industry will surely change with streaming. The change in the form provided will have a great impact on the work itself and the business method. It will be a year when those changes can be clearly seen. And a lot of people looked at this and said, wait, there were rumors that Kojima was working on some sort of project that was maybe being pushed by Stadia. That apparently fell through, and then there were rumors that he was talking with Microsoft, potentially to use xCloud and Azure to make some sort of game, and the mind of Kojima mixed in with what could be with like the power of the cloud, that is intriguing. And the fact that he's bringing up streaming, which he has a whole film division now, so who knows, maybe he's doing something there that would push those boundaries. It's just interesting to see that he's like, oh yeah, streaming, that's going to be a big thing for 2022. Well, I would expect him to have something new to show, maybe in the game department, since it has been a little while at least since Death Stranding, so maybe it's time for his next grand reveal. Also, we're just a couple of months out now from Horizon Forbidden West releasing, and I'm getting pretty excited for this one, especially since we keep seeing more and more previews. Some of these are showing some pretty impressive looking bosses, like Game Informer had an exclusive on one, and you can see some of the video here. This for the mighty Slitherfang is this huge looking snake thing, and just the way it's moving around in the environment, some of apparently the different attacks, we saw some here, but we didn't see all of them, and according to the developers at Guerrilla, it'll react differently depending on ways you try to conquer it and win in the fight itself. And you may have a completely different experience than other people who go through this same boss battle, but it's super impressive looking in motion with the small clip. And we also saw the other larger creature with like the big mammoth that looked really impressive. So I'm curious how far Guerrilla's gonna push things in this large open world with Horizon Forbidden West, and I'm really excited to dive into that, especially with more and more previews that we're seeing. It just continues to look more and more impressive. Oh, and if you're someone who did just get a Switch for Christmas, it looks like Nintendo is running a 7-day trial that you can just jump into for Nintendo Switch Online. We can see this tweet where they say for a limited time, eligible My Nintendo members can try Nintendo Switch Online for 7 days without using any platinum points. And if you're someone who just got a Switch, you haven't signed up for Nintendo Switch Online just yet, might be a good way just to try it out. And doing these little trials is common for all these companies, Nintendo, Microsoft, Sony. I mean, Sony will do their free weekends at times on PlayStation Network, and Microsoft just gives away like parts of Game Pass for like 48 hours with a Snickers bar or something, right? So it's a good idea for Nintendo to do this just to see what people think about Nintendo Switch Online. And if you like the Nintendo or Super Nintendo games and maybe don't mind the very limited, we'll say, offerings when it comes to the Switch Online aspect, hey, you might sign up for it, and that's kind of what Nintendo's banking on here. So if you're curious, it's there. Might be worth signing up and trying it out for a week. See what you think. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Final Fantasy XVI and, well, some bad news that was posted online in the form of an update. We were hoping to find out more information around Final Fantasy XVI, as it was talked about by Square and the producer Yoshida that, yeah, you can expect that by the end of 2021. Well, here's the update that they released on Twitter under the Final Fantasy Twitter account, where they say, when we last spoke, I promised I would have more information on Final Fantasy XVI sometime later in 2021. However, I regret to inform you that I will be unable to keep that promise as complications stemming from the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic have delayed the game's development by almost half a year. That said, we have spent much of 2021 addressing this issue and hope to see its impact to a minimum by the new year, allowing us to better focus on the tasks at hand. So that leaves us with the question, when can we expect the next round of information? Well, I am happy to announce the current plan is to conduct our next big reveal in spring of 2022 as we seek to build excitement leading up to the game's eventual release. I deeply apologize to all those who have been looking forward to learning more about Final Fantasy XVI, and thank you for your continued patience while we focus our combined efforts on development. Now, this was written up by Final Fantasy XVI's producer, Mr. Yoshida, who is also the producer behind Final Fantasy XIV, which has seen a massive resurgence ever since its troubled release way back in the day on like the PlayStation 3 and PC. So I would say Mr. Yoshida has garnered quite a bit of trust now from the gaming community in Final Fantasy. So I think a lot of people are looking at this saying, all right, that's fine. Take your time with it. We've seen what you've been able to do with Final Fantasy XIV. 16 looks good so far from what we've seen. We'd prefer that it comes out in a good condition or good working state and not come out like Cyberpunk. I feel like any game that needs more time, just do this. We've seen Cyberpunk. Most people are like, okay, we can hang out and wait, and not a big deal after that whole thing. So the idea of Final Fantasy XVI potentially now falling into 2023 seems becoming more of a reality for people. I actually did a poll on this, and we'll look at that later on, where people are thinking this game is going to end up. But you have to remember, Final Fantasy XVI is a big release for Square. After what they did with Final Fantasy XV when that released in 2016, so potentially 6-7 years since then until we get Final Fantasy XVI. Remember, they did a lot of extra content for Final Fantasy XV. They did a Royal Edition, merchandise, the whole thing. So 16 is going to be a big title for them that, if it goes well, they can build on years and years down the line, which of course means the game has to come out in good condition. And after what we've been hearing more and more from other studios, the pandemic led to remote work, which in some cases with outsourcing led to entire cancellations around certain jobs that were being done. So they're trying to navigate it. Sounds like they've had it worked out. It was interesting to hear that they were so transparent that they said, hey, it's been delayed half a year with development and the processes that we're going through. That's the biggest thing here is I feel like people appreciate the transparency. Remember what happened with Metroid Prime 4? The response there was actually good because they just came out and said it. They're like, hey, we had to basically cancel and restart, and we're handing it off to Retro Studios. In this case, I mean, he comes out and says, yeah, 6 months has been delayed. I do wonder where it would have been placed then. Was Forspoken also delayed 6 months at Square? Because let's say this comes out holiday 2022. Does that mean it would have come out like a month or two after Forspoken? Seems strange for Square to push those two games together. So that's one of the reasons why I'm hopeful that it can make it out by holiday 2022, but I wouldn't be shocked if this is a spring 2023 title. But I guess we'll find out more in spring of 2022 when we're expecting to find out more about the game, whether it's the characters, the plot, or maybe even a release window. Next up, let's talk about two big game releases that we're anticipating to come out in 2022. It looks like they may have had their release dates leaked a bit early. This was getting passed around a lot online, so I wanted to take a look at it here, and we'll start with the first one, that being God of War Ragnarok. You can see this tweet from PlayStation Game Size saying, according to PlayStation database, God of War Ragnarok coming September 30th, 2022. Maybe it's just a placeholder. Now, I saw September 30th immediately and realized, okay, that'd be like the last day of the quarter before like the fourth quarter of the year starts. So they could throw that in there and say, okay, we're trying to get this game out in the third quarter, sometime in September. That would make sense to me based on Sony's current release calendar they have set up so far in 2022, where we see Horizon Forbidden West at the beginning of the year, Gran Turismo kind of in like the middle of the year, sort of, and then God of War to cap things off there, and then maybe some other smaller releases that they sort of put in the year alongside of those. Sony typically likes to have their last game out by September, October at the latest, and I feel like kind of open up room for releases that they make a ton of money on from third parties like your Call of Duties, your Maddens, your NBAs, all these other titles. Typically, third-party games sell the best on PlayStation, and it makes sense considering they have this large install base, so they've become kind of the default system for some of these other games that they just collect royalties on. So why try to crowd up that part of the year with your first party titles when you can put them out earlier in the year, just ahead of that holiday season, and just kind of sell them through the holiday season without having to do this big marketing campaign alongside of Call of Duty. But I will say September 30th is a Friday, and that's typically when we'll see Sony release their different games. So it's possible, but remember, Sony is also no strangers to delaying a game if they're a few months out from release, like a Returnal or a Last of Us Part 2. So we could get into the summertime, and we already have our release date for God of War, and they're like, no, it's got to go into October. So that's the biggest thing here. They could be aiming for this, but not necessarily hit that targeted release date. But something to keep in mind with God of War Ragnarok, and September for me is kind of expected based on where Sony will release their games around the holidays. Now, the other game is a bit more interesting to me because, well, I kind of think this game could find its way into 2023. We could see this tweet once again from PlayStation Game Size saying, according to PlayStation database, Sonic Frontiers coming November 15th, 2022. Maybe it's just a placeholder. Now, November 15th is a Tuesday. That kind of lines up with when Sonic Colors Ultimate came out. That was also on a Tuesday. Basically, Sega has no problem releasing it essentially midweek. Just, it's Sonic, it's out there, that's fine. It's also 4 days after Starfield, although I don't really know if those two games would conflict with each other one way or the other. Sure, there's a shared audience because it's video games, but I don't necessarily think they would completely clash and you would have Starfield just completely run over Sonic Frontiers. Based on what they've shown with Sonic Frontiers, I have noticed there is quite a bit of interest in what they're aiming for here, but they are aiming for something that's pretty ambitious for Sonic Team, and I mean, they already said holiday 2022, so this lines up with that, but I wouldn't be shocked if we get into the summer and they're like, you know what? Sonic needs a bit more time. This is now a 2023 title just based on them basically shooting for a Breath of the Wild Sonic. I know we say that about a lot of games, but like, come on. Some of those shots they were doing sweeping around an open world Sonic game, it did look like they were aiming to kind of put that impression on people with this release. So there we have it, a November 15th date for Sonic Frontiers, September 30th date for God of War Ragnarok. We'll see how well those hold up as we head into 2022. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about a poll that 50,000 people in Japan voted on for their favorite console game of all time. Now think about all the different games they could be voting for and come up with what you think the #1 most voted for console game was in Japan. We're going to take a look at the top 10, and we'll start at 10 and kind of work our way down here. This was posted up by Gamatsu, by the way, and I'll link down below in the sources because they had 100 different games with the results in order. So you can see kind of where they all placed. But let's start with number 10, which was Super Mario Bros. 3. That makes sense. It's a big title, right? It definitely had some moments there where it was super impressive when you saw it on the original Nintendo. Then we had Final Fantasy X. It makes sense, a Final Fantasy game in Japan getting voted on like that. Chrono Trigger, classic. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which, yeah, it's the ultimate Smash Bros. That makes sense there. Dragon Quest 3. I like seeing Dragon Quest 3 in there. I think that's pretty cool. Splatoon 2, which is Splatoon series, is very popular in Japan. Animal Crossing New Horizons, which has sold extremely well in Japan for the Animal Crossing series. Final Fantasy VII, again, that's a classic for a lot of people. Dragon Quest V, if you haven't caught on, Dragon Quest is very popular in Japan. And then the #1 game, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. And I was a little surprised on this because The Legend of Zelda hasn't exactly been the biggest series in Japan. It typically will do better in other parts of the world, like in the US. However, I guess just Breath of the Wild was one of those big-time releases, even in Japan, to where it really had people turn a corner on the Legend of Zelda franchise. The game series has always been great, but it hasn't always been that massive seller. Not like an Animal Crossing New Horizons, for example, but Breath of the Wild is the best-selling Legend of Zelda game ever, and a lot of people see it as their favorite game of all time. Also, I was a little surprised that Pokemon didn't make it into the top 10, although we cut off right at 11 and that was Diamond and Pearl. But yeah, let me know what you think of that. A Legend of Zelda game taking the #1 position in just overall console games voted on by 50,000 people in Japan. Is that surprising to you? And before we go to the comment of the day, we're taking a little poll that I posted up yesterday, where I asked, do you think Final Fantasy XVI will release in 2022? Look at that. 81% said no, 19% said yes. And looking through the comments, a lot of people were like, I just want it to be good. I hope the development goes smoothly from here on and they're able to produce a very good game. That's mostly what people are concerned about, not like, oh, it has to come out in 2022. And again, I feel like there's a lot of trust right now with Mr. Yoshida after what he was able to do with Final Fantasy XIV. People absolutely love that game. They don't necessarily love the queues, and I mean, they've had to apologize profusely for that, and hopefully they can work that whole situation out in 2022. But I feel like we're gonna get into the spring, they're gonna have the big grand reveal, and there's gonna be a lot of excitement around it. Hopefully, they can flash up the big holiday 2022 release window, but hey, if it's 2023, that's fine, it's 2023. We'll wait a bit longer for what should be, fingers crossed, a really good Final Fantasy game. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day as you're seeing here. This is from Nick saying, when I think of Diablo, the first thing that comes to mind is a kickflip. Thanks, Activision. Glad to see the company fitting in devs where they are best suited. I mean, Diablo is basically just skateboarding with demons. The biggest thing here is Vicarious Visions is like a veteran development studio. They've been around for 30 years. Well, they were around for 30 years before they were absorbed into Blizzard. I mean, they were fitting Tony Hawk Pro Skater onto the Game Boy Advance, like 2. If you've ever played that, it's actually a pretty cool version of the game. It's like this isometric top-down game that somehow, with Tony Hawk Pro Skater, works with 2 face buttons and a couple of shoulder buttons. Try it out if you have a chance. It's kind of cool. But like, I guess Activision said, well, we need to get Diablo out. And well, Vicarious Visions can get it done alongside in Blizzard, moved them over, and then slowly just kind of absorb them into Blizzard. It's weird because Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2 did well. Like, it's the fastest selling game in the Tony Hawk franchise. Think about that for a second, and the overall hype and mania around Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and then 2, whew, it was something else back then when 2 released. But no, 1 and 2 was the best selling in the franchise. Sold 1 million copies in 2 weeks. You figure, wow, we should do another one of these. Why don't we do 3 or 4? Maybe a brand new one. Vicarious Visions seem to know what they're doing. Or we put them on Diablo 2, absorb them into Blizzard, and that way we can get that game out. Who needs Tony Hawk and fun anyway? And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button, really helps out. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. Was Final Fantasy XVI seeing about a 6-month delay in development? Do you think that's coming out in 2022, or is that now a 2023 title? And then what about God of War Ragnarok? Maybe September 30th and Sonic Frontiers November 15th. How well do you think those dates will hold up? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.